Hello, hello, hello. It's Meredith from the Papery Craftery. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make quilling paper crocuses. It might be croci, I'm not 100% sure. I'm talking about those little tiny purple and white flowers that peek up out of the snow when spring is here. They're the first sign of spring. I'm ready for it. It hasn't even been that bad of a winter here on the East Coast. I'm ready. Let's get going. First, choose your white quilling strips for the crocus petals. I'm using 1/8 inch width, 22-inch long strips of bright white paper, but I need them cut in half because these crocus petals are going to be very thin. I'm using the same technique of cutting the quilling strips in half that I used in my quilling paper clover video a couple of weeks ago. I'll link to that below. Continue cutting your paper strip in half until you get to the end. There are more narrow quilling strips available. If I can find some, I'll link to them in the description box below. These strips were actually a little bit longer than I needed them to be, so I ended up tearing off some excess to make them each 17 inches long. I also wanted to make sure that I tore off the blunt edges because I'm going to be gluing these quilling strips end to end, and I always want to glue the ripped edge instead of a cut edge. It just lays a lot nicer, it's much easier to glue. And at this point I realized that I should have filled up my needle nose container a little bit more before I started this project, but finally got to work. I applied a tiny bit of glue on one end of the 17-inch long strip, and I overlapped a tiny bit of the second strip to make one continuous quilling paper strip. I decided to use my Quilled Creations Savvy Slotted tool to roll up this extra long strip. I've written about this in my blog in the past, and I can link to that down below. It's just a nice tool to have around when you're quilling a lot. It's a little bit more gentle on your wrist because you're actually just using your fingers, as you can see, to roll the tool instead of your whole hand. I just find it a really useful tool to have in my kit. Anyway, you roll to the very end of your strip and gently remove it from the tool. At this point, you want to carefully let it open up just a tiny amount in the center. I find it easiest to hold the back as well when I do this because it is very thin and easy. It's easy for it to pop out of the coil. When you have just that little opening, you're going to want to glue the end to secure your coil. Again, my half-empty glue bottle is not doing me any favors here, but get it together, get it glued down, and you can see it's a little bit open right in the very center. Now we're going to shape the petal by gently pushing the top and bottom at the same time to make a long oval shape. You might want to still keep a finger behind it to make sure that the center doesn't pop out because this paper is very thin. To keep the shape, apply a small amount of glue on the bottom third of your petal and spread with a small paintbrush so it's all over the end. You do not want to get any glue on the top portion of the petal because we're going to be painting it in just a moment. After making 5 more flower petals, it's time to add some color to your crocus petals. To do this, we're going to use watercolor. I'm using a cheapo set that my kids use for their artwork. It probably just cost $1 or $2. And I'm just adding a little bit of purple watercolor paint to the end of my petals where I didn't add the glue earlier. The glue is going to act like a resist, so any place that has glue, you're not going to be able to add paint, which is good because we really only need it on that other end anyway. Watercolor paint is actually pretty forgiving. You can see I added a little bit extra there than I wanted to, so I just used a little bit more water and smudged it out a little bit, made it a little bit more blurry, and it softened the look quite a bit. Continue painting the other 5 petals. When your watercolor is dried, now you can start assembling your flowers. I would grab some Aleene's tacky glue. It's one of my favorite glues I use when I'm making three-dimensional flowers or any other type of quilling. I actually just made a video about my favorite quilling glues, and I will add a link to that down below. I like to use a little bit of the tacky glue on the side of my work board and just use a needle tool or a toothpick to add a dot to whatever I'm trying to glue. So for the crocus, I'm choosing 3 petals and just adding a little bit of glue on the edge that does not have the paint and making that into sort of a triangle shape. That's going to be one layer of our flower. Now to make these look really realistic, I like to mold them. So once the tacky glue has set for a second, carefully lift up your flower petals and place them in a shallow bowl, or I'm using the underside of my quilling mold maker just to give them sort of an opening look. You don't want your crocus to be completely flat because when they come out of the ground in nature, they sort of have a cup shape. The next part of our flower will be the stamen that come out of the center of the crocus. And for this, I chose a bright orange paper called Melon. It's by Quilled Creations. It's another 1/8 inch paper. Again, that's a little bit too wide, so I trimmed it in half. You probably only need about a 6-inch length of this melon paper. And once it's cut in half, you're going to want to tear pieces that are about 1 inch in length. I'm using 6 of these pieces here for each flower. Once you have your 6 stamen pieces cut, you're going to use a needle tool or a slotted tool will work here too. And starting from one end, roll about halfway down your strip of paper, and then you can take your needle tool or your slotted tool out. So what it should look like at this point is sort of like a little letter P. Add a dot of glue between the coil that you made with your tool and the tail of the paper to keep that shape. It's kind of difficult to show this on the video because these pieces are really small. But once it dries in that P shape, the letter P, I sort of squeeze the coiled circle just a tad to sort of flatten it out a little bit. Repeat that same process for the other 5 pieces of the melon paper. Once your stamen have been made and your first layer of your quilled crocus has dried and set in the mold, you can add the other 3 petals to make another layer on the outside. You might need a pair of tweezers for this. I grabbed some, but I ended up not using them for this part. I actually just picked up each petal, dipped it in the tacky glue just on the white end, and put it on the outside of my molded petals. I would go ahead and put this back into your mold that you used earlier because it'll keep the petals together as they dry. Some of them might move around a little bit, but go ahead and put them back into place and let that set until the glue dries. This is also the step where you can go ahead and add those 6 melon stamen into the center of your flower. You probably will need your tweezers at this point because these are teeny tiny little pieces. I apologize for my hand moving out of frame every time I tried to pick up one of these pieces with my tweezers. I didn't realize that would be hard to see, but I'm really just placing the top part, the center part, circle part, excuse me, on the top in my tweezers because I just wasn't picking them up that way. So place them in the center of your flower. They don't have to be all in one place. They don't have to be all the same height. It actually looks a little bit more natural if they vary in height as you glue them. You can probably still adjust your stamen if you need to, but once you're happy with the way they look, let that dry, and these crocus are ready to decorate with. And now, like I said, you could have stopped there and had some lovely crocus to put on cards or picture frames or anything like that, but I usually like to add some flower stems to my 3D flowers to make them look just a little bit more realistic. So to do this, I'm going to first make a tight coil out of a 22-inch strip of leaf green paper. This one is by Craft Harbor. I'm using my slotted savvy tool again, savvy slotted tool, sorry, and just rolling this all the way up, start to finish, into a tight coil, removing it from my tool and gluing it to close. And surprise, surprise, I did fill up my bottle. So look how easy that was. Once your coil is sealed, then use the tip of one finger to just make a dent by pushing out the center, adding a little bit of glue to the inside, and brushing that out with a paintbrush. That will keep the shape of your indented coil. And for the rest of the flower stem, I'm going to be using a small piece of 18 gauge copper wire, some green floral tape, and also just a pair of wire clips just to snip that piece of the copper wire. So I pull out what I need. These are going to be pretty small stems because these flowers don't grow very tall. And then I'm going to wrap that stem start to finish with floral tape. I am not an expert on all things floral tape. I really just like it because it's a quick way to cover the wire and have it look a little bit more realistic. Sometimes the green floral stems you buy that are already green in the store are very bright green. They don't really look natural to me. So I found that this color works a little bit better. I might not do this the right way. I'm not someone who works with this except for quilling, so there might be an easier way to do this, but I just wrap the whole wire from end to end, and the heat of your fingers, I believe, is what makes it stick to itself. And you can see there I even missed a little bit on the end, ripped off a small piece, and kind of had to puzzle piece it back together. But in the end, it does the job, and I think it looks pretty good for now. So I'm going to use that with that leaf green dome that I just made. And the dome part is what's actually going to hold the flower. If you picture, a flower doesn't just grow on a stem. There's something that connects the flower to the stem. So there's, I don't know what you call that, but there's a green section that the flower grows from when it becomes a flower from a bud. So that is what that green dome is. So I add a little bit of tacky glue to the end of my wire, put the dome on, and then wiped off the excess just to clean that part up a little bit. I'm going to set that whole piece aside to dry for a few minutes before I add my flower. And once your green dome is dry to your stem, you can go ahead and attach your crocus. That should be dry by now. So all I did was take it from the mold, add a little bit of glue to the bottom, and let it dry inside that green dome. And you can see it looks like it's budding. I even made one here with a bit of a larger green dome, and I had the petals dry in a smaller mold so they look closer together, and that one I think looks like it's blooming even more. It's just coming out of the ground. So you have a couple of options with these crocus. I think they turned out so pretty and lifelike. You can really see the close-up here of the stamen and how the light purple paint just really makes these pop. So that's it for quilling paper crocus. I hope you enjoyed the new technique of using some watercolor on the edges of your paper. I think that'd be really fun to experiment with in the future. And if you do, leave a comment down below because I'd really like to hear how you used it. All right, that's all I have for today. Don't forget to subscribe so you can hear about the next time I post a video. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.